Hi, welcome back. We are, settle. Okay, we don't want to make anyone ill. Welcome back to Giving Tuesday Live here at BTI. And we are joined now with BTI President David Stern, who's going to join us and talk a little bit about the Institute and what the future of science looks like and all that good stuff. But Ben, thanks again for joining us on this second installment of Giving Tuesday Live here at BTI. We're talking a lot about the Institute and all of the reasons why it's great to be involved with BTI and why even you might want to consider supporting BTI on Giving Tuesday. Hopefully we've inspired you. If you want to learn more about those opportunities, you can visit btiscience.org/give. David, thanks for joining us. David is not someone with a lot of time, a lot of free time, so to get a half hour of his availability is great. So thanks for coming on. And, we've talked to a lot of people today about their involvement with BTI and the work they do here at BTI. So we've had friends talk about their involvement. We've had scientists talk about what they do. You have your own lab here, but you're also the president. So what do you see as the core mission of the Boyce Thompson Institute?
Yeah, well, when I came to Boyce Thompson Institute in 1989, I was a wet behind the ears scientist with a long beard. There are pictures of me around here to prove it. And I just wanted an opportunity to explore questions in science that hadn't been answered before. And at the time, that's what I thought science was. I thought it was just turning over stones and seeing what you'd find next. And that was why I got into science and to some extent why I'm still in it. But I also learned about Boyce Thompson Institute when I came here. I knew about Cornell, but I didn't know much about BTI, and I found out that there was a philanthropist that founded it, Boyce Thompson, William Boyce Thompson, and he wasn't a scientist at all. He made money in the markets. But he got interested in the food supply. He saw the Russian Revolution, and he saw rioting peasants, he saw hungry peasants, he saw instability of that government. And he made the determination after talking with scientists and others that research was the answer to the future of food security. And in his mind, it wasn't so much agriculture per se, growing things, breeding things, it was more understanding the nature of plant life. And that's really what we thought of at the time as basic research, really just understanding how plants do business, how they use the energy of the sun, how do they get water to the top of a tall tree, the things like that. Things that we wonder about and now sometimes take for granted. So he founded the Institute as a discovery institute, thinking that if you think about discoveries as bricks, that those bricks would build a house of new agriculture, of a new food supply, of sustainability into the coming years. And I joined the Institute knowing then about that mission. And as president, I've had the opportunity to study his biography, his beliefs, his speeches, people around him, and I understand a lot better now what motivated him to found a research institute. And curiously enough, Boyce Thompson built the first institute opposite his house because he said he wanted to see how scientists worked. And this is really interesting because we often hear the term ivory tower when we're hearing about scientists and academics. And, one of the problems with the public perception of science is that scientists are cloistered off in this tower. And I think Boyce Thompson somehow understood that and said, I want to interact, I want to see how scientists work, I want to be close by them. And that was the case until he died. And then in the 70s, the Institute relocated to Cornell, where we are now in this beautiful building, because, frankly, the science needs the other kinds of scientists and academics around it, the supply of students, of other faculty to enrich our experience. But at the beginning, he wanted to watch how scientists worked. So the mission of BTI is still much as it was at the beginning. It was fundamental research to ensure sustainable food supply, but we've enlarged our mission to think about human health, to think about the environment, and we often move beyond plants themselves to accomplish our goals.
So how have you seen in your time, both, maybe historically looking all the way back to the founding of BTI, but even just in your time as a scientist since 1989, how has the landscape of basic research evolved? Is it in a better place now? Is it in a more worrisome place? How do you rate where we're at right now?
Well, I think every generation might have some of the same feelings, but I've read things where people say now, well, all the big questions have been answered. We know the structure of DNA, and we've sequenced the human genome, and maybe there aren't any big secrets left. And then you ask somebody, how does memory work? How do feelings work? Oh, maybe we don't know everything. Maybe we don't know how plants can survive in the desert all that well, and so on. So I think there are questions out there, and I think since I joined the Institute nearly 30 years ago, as in the case in many kinds of professions, the technology has really opened up new capabilities. And in BTI, the power of computing is huge. What we've discovered about where apples come from, or how we've bred watermelons, or just the origins of life, the ability of what we call big data to change our view of things is tremendous. So when I was a new scientist, what I did, what took me a week or a month or a year, and now would be nothing. I could not compete with the students and scientists of today with the tools I had yesterday. So that has changed a great deal. Now there's other ways in which science has changed. I don't think the nature of fundamental or basic research has changed very much. There's still the idea of turning over stones, of making a chance discovery that will turn out to matter a great deal, but what's changed is where the money is coming from. And now there's two main forces at play. One is that government agencies that fund science, like the National Science Foundation, Department of Agriculture, the Institutes of Health, Department of Energy, those are our main funders here. They've been told by Congress to deliver results that matter. And when you have a Congress where only one member of Congress has a PhD, you can't explain basic science discoveries to them and really get through about the importance of science. Right. But if you say we're going to cure a disease, we're going to make plants healthy where they weren't, they're going to be more nutritious, et cetera, we're going to save water, we're going to save energy, aha, now they'll support science. So the science agencies have been pushed to be more careful about having a mission that would matter for the American economy, for American competitiveness internationally and so forth. And so the funding has subtly shifted, I would say, away from the really blue sky kind of research to things that are more easily explained, first to the agencies, then to Congress, then to the public. And the second big influence has been a bit of a rise of philanthropy in terms of supporting science. And so in agriculture, Bill and Melinda Gates, and actually in public health, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is probably the best known. That we have a lot of support from them at BTI, and it's doing amazing things for agriculture in developing countries, and the first world should be helping the third world. But that money is quite directed. It's often associated with specific milestones or accomplishments that the foundation wants to see. And many large-scale private donors also want to see results. So donors and science agencies are more results-oriented, something more tangible, something that can be explained, something that seems to be advancing society. But if I get back to the bricks analogy, right, we have to keep making bricks. Mm-hmm. And funders don't like to fund bricks. Bricks aren't as interesting as structures. Yeah. Architecture is not, it's the building, it's not the materials that went into the building. And I think that linkage has been lost in the minds of many. And if we don't restore it, we're going to eventually run out of bricks. Right. And then what are we going to use to build our beautiful buildings of knowledge and utility? So that's how I think about science funding.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too dissimilar, talked about Cornell, and every major university has an unrestricted annual fund, and it's one of the hardest things to raise money for because it's unrestricted and it's not directed at anything, but it keeps the lights on, yep, as the schools like to say, but it's hard to sell people on keeping the lights on.
Well, one wonderful thing about people is we all want to make a difference, in our lifetimes. And we want to know that if we are giving of ourselves, I mean, I've spent 30 years of my life here. If I'm giving money to an organization, I want to make a difference. And if you give money to basic research, I guarantee you, you will make a difference. Let me just give an example. We have this incredible summer internship program. So every year we bring 20 or 30 high school and undergraduate interns from across the country into BTI. And on day one, I tell them, this summer is going to make an indelible difference in your life. I don't know what kind of a difference it's going to make, but when you look back, it's going to be a turning point in your career. And I think that comes true. And it's not because they figured out how to make a better plant or a better tomato or a better anything else. It's because they grew as people. They learned about science. They learned about science connection to the world, and they're going to go out and make a difference in a whole lot of different ways. And your funding, people give to BTI to support the summer interns because they understand the human factor, that science is really done by people.
Right.
And the people go out and change the world. So if nothing else, think about the careers that are built through science at BTI, where we try to give our interns and our postdocs and our students all a very broad experience, not just go to the laboratory, shut the door, get to work. That's how it was for me, maybe. Now we say learn communication skills, learn, about the technology transfer, learn we call it transferable skills, communication skills, so that they can go out in the world and make a difference in a whole lot of different ways, all maybe tracing back some part of that to their summer at Boyce-Thompson Institute. So I always say, what does BTI do? Well, yes, we make discoveries. It's a word in our mission, but we also build careers. And not just the scientists, the support staff. People come through here, and it should make a difference in their lives. That's one reason I love BTI and the culture here.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said culture, because I wanted to jump to a point you just made me think of, and that's the unique, what I think is one of BTI's most outstanding characteristics, is how we always talk about, the scientists in this building, the people in this building come from 40 different countries. And I think having interns exposed to that is remarkable, but it's also is just a place to go to work. It's pretty remarkable in its own right, especially here in Ithaca, New York, which is pretty isolated from pretty much everything. And you've talked about that before. What do you think that, when, a lot of people say we're saving the world, right? We're an institute for global good, but literally the world is in these walls here at BTI. And what do you think that does for the research here?
Well, I think without, if we were isolationists, we only took Americans, and even that's a rather diverse term, I think we probably have to shut this place down. I mean, science is an international sport, no question about it. And America is supposed to be the land of opportunity, the Statue of Liberty and everything. And this, when we did this bean counting and found out we had 40 people, this was around the time that the president tried to ban, visitors from certain countries. And we thought, well, how diverse are we really? And it's extraordinary. 40 countries and 160 people inside the walls. I mean, who would have ever guessed? Nobody would have guessed that number. So we are extremely diverse. And we've had some amazing events here where people bring their native dishes and things like that. And you can get all the ingredients for those in Ithaca because it's a melting pot, at least because of the university. So we're a reflection of that. On the other hand, why is it that we have people from 40 countries? How come we don't have Americans, and again, I don't mean any particular race, but just people who are born and raised in this country, why are they not going into science? And so it's not so much that the rest of the world is out competing the Americans. There's a little bit of a void. And I think it has to do with the perception of science that kids have as they grow up. Maybe how little science they're getting in the schools, maybe how it's taught, maybe what they read or what they hear about scientists, as I mentioned earlier, being isolated. And so scientists are perhaps too good at talking at people and are not good enough at speaking with them. And so one of the goals of communications at BTI is, when I talk about teaching people science communications, is this word engagement. And engagement is a two-way street. So one thing that I'm committed to BTI doing is becoming more engaged with the outside world. This is one little way of doing it because this is really talking out. But how well do we listen? And how much better do we learn when we listen and when we talk? So I think science has a lot to learn about listening to communities. What do they need? Not to tell them what science they need, but to ask them and to help them determine the course of science. I think this would do worlds for the interest in STEM and science in this country and engage more of a domestic workforce. We still want a rich mix of people from around the world, but let's not be bereft of Americans here in America. Let's engage the people of this country. There's over 300 million of them. Where are they? So that's my opinion on diversity.
Well, so it's an important point. So you talk about, essentially recruiting the next generation of scientists, educating them with our internship program. And you talk about, how funding has evolved and where we're at with that. And that all those are all important aspects of the future of science. And one thing you're working on or worked on was some scenario planning where you created these stories that try to kind of predict or anticipate different versions of science, the science research climate in the year 2035. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, when I was brought up as a scientist, again, in this sort of academic vintage, we are used to writing 3-year grant proposals. Sometimes it was 2-year proposals. So we'd always think 2 or 3 years into the future and make a proposal. We'd get some money or not get some money, and we'd go on. When I became the leader of BTI, I realized, it seems obvious maybe, but since I had very little experience, well, organizations actually do need to think about the future. And how do you think about the future when you don't know the future? Do you have a dartboard and you throw wherever the dart lies, that's going to be the future? It's truly unknown. So I was fortunate enough to go to a workshop out in California a few years ago where I learned about kind of an art called scenario planning. And scenario planning says we accept the fact that the future is uncertain, and by thinking about the biggest uncertainties, the things we really don't know that are relevant to, in this case, our mission as plant scientists, we can imagine some very different futures. And for example, a future where turning over stones is the only kind of research that gets supported, and on the other hand, a future where turning over stones is kind of forbidden. You have to solve a problem. Or a future where everybody wants to get into science versus a future where nobody wants to get into science. And if you create futures around those uncertainties, you can create 4 futures out of 2 uncertainties. You find out that the world could look really different in 2035 in one set of scenarios where it could be a renaissance for science, and another scenario where we're really struggling. Nobody wants to do science. We have to everything. We're just solving problems. We're putting out fires. We're whack-a-mole. How does an institute prepare for those 2 very divergent futures? And just as one example, we need people who are flexible and adaptable, because that's a character that is important in a world where you have to solve problems or you have to work in different kinds of teams. And so then you start thinking about training. Well, we're used to training people to work on the computer, to work in the laboratory, but how do you train a person to be flexible and adaptable? This is a really weird concept, but it's really important. And so in the future, our future, so one thing BTI is doing is trying to impart those kind of skill sets to the people who come through, particularly the students and the postdocs. We have an initiative starting next year where we're going to try to provide some training that will create those kinds of qualities in people where they'll be able to flourish, even if the futures are very different, because they will be adaptable. Another is teamwork. So scientists have collaborated forever. A few worked alone, most worked together, but now more than ever, team science is the only way to go. And the vast majority of our funding at BTI is for team science. They're for people with different backgrounds, with different capabilities working together, a computer scientist and a more of a plant scientist, et cetera. How do you teach people to work in teams, to form teams, how do you lead a team effectively? How do you not dominate? How do you allocate resources? These are the kind of skills that we want to teach people at BTI, and it's therefore the kind of people we need to hire at BTI who can teach those skills, who believe in those skills. So I think the kind of science that BTI is going to support and the kind of scientists we want to attract is actually evolving away from a traditional academic model towards a more hybrid model where we emphasize team research, we emphasize soft skill training, but we still make the discoveries that matter for the future.
So is that kind of approach, I know you kind of shop this concept around a little bit in the science community, and you're hoping more people take a look at it. What's your general feeling? I mean, is the research community, are they ready to think about the future, or do they just say, David, we got a lot going on right now. We're pretty focused on what's in front of us. Is it hard to make people in science think about the future?
Yeah. Well, it's not hard to make them think about it. It's sometimes hard to make them believe in a future that's going to be real different. And in fact, that change is a good thing. So if you pulled up to the science station with your bus that said, incredible but incredibly different future as the destination, some people would get on, they'd run on, they'd fight for a seat, and others would stand back saying, no, not me. So you always have the willing, the people who understand the system is broken or that the system needs to evolve, that there's tremendous possibilities out there, and they want to be part of it. And there's others that are just afraid of change, or they don't believe in change. They think that academics, it's about 1,000 years old, is doing just fine, and the public has it all wrong. I happen to believe that change is exciting and it's positive, it's risky, but why else get up in the morning?
Yeah.
You know? That's why I get up.
We talked to Charlie Arnson a little earlier, and he briefly talked about, how he feels he was able to be more of a risk taker than most scientists feel they can be now. Is that something you see as well?
Charlie has always been a risk taker. I think that's why we hired him at Boyce Thompson Institute. He came in with a bunch of slides about making vaccines and baby food. I mean, we're like, this has never been done before. This is completely cool. So we had that kind of sales pitch, and he wasn't afraid. So that lack of fear, that confidence is super important. But, risk-taking is associated with how people are judged. So if a scientist feels that he or she is going to be judged solely on, for example, how much money they bring in the door and where their research was published, they will do anything they can to maximize those two parameters, independent of anything else they might do, like community service, team building, et cetera. So people will respond to how they are being judged. And I believe that, yes, people are extremely risk averse because they're worried in a system that has long valued individuals for the discipline that they have mastered or the most important discovery that they made and they own that area. They're afraid of straying too far. They feel like they get punished by the peer community if they stray too far away. Now, if you want to unleash, the inner risk taker, give them some unfettered support, give them some dollars, give them an environment where they're rewarded for risk taking, where failure is a mark of daring and it's not a mark of, a lack of success.
Right.
So BTI needs to create that kind of environment. Now, there's always going to be an undercurrent of this relatively low-risk research. It's on the mission of an agency or a philanthropic foundation, and I think that's fine. I mean, they are trying to solve problems that are directed, but there's nothing wrong with that. We should be solving problems, but let's make sure we keep making those bricks. Let's bring in people and support them to go turn over stones, to make discoveries. Otherwise, as I say, science will advance less. It's in the scenarios, you have to keep making discoveries to advance, our society and the human condition. It's just a fact.
So considering it's Giving Tuesday and thinking about the future, do you see a need for more diverse funding sources that don't come with as many strings attached, so to speak, to allow for that kind of risk-taking or discovery science that maybe people aren't as inclined to do right now or aren't able to do because of limitations to, what their funders expect of them?
Yeah. Well, I think it's the dream of anybody who ever has done a budget in research and development to have discretionary money. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
However, again, looking at these scenarios, if science becomes more directed towards need, there are actually folks who will get into science because they see a need. They want to, as I say, to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And in their case, maybe in a tangible way. So there's nothing wrong with money that comes in from a donor or a science agency that is directed towards a problem. I have no problem with that money at all. I think if there's problems that need to be solved, support is needed, scientists want to do the work, let it happen here. I'm good with it.
Right.
But I do think on the edge there are risk takers, and I can support them to some extent with my endowment money. Boyce Thompson left a generous endowment. So, if donors want to work in specific areas, that's a good thing for BTI too. There's nothing wrong with that at all. What we need to do is simply have, a little bit more freedom to allocate resources in ways to be opportunistic, to seize opportunities where they might be just. We have one now where one of the scientists is interested in developing a new agricultural crop for New York, this so-called pichu berry, this husk cherry.
Yeah.
What a neat thing to do, and fortunately we have a donor who's supporting that work. So I'm great with that, But I also want to be able to allocate discretionary money because this really incredible person walks through the door, I want to support them. Somebody comes up with an idea and they just need a year of funding to figure out if it's got any legs. We need to have that too. So it's not bad and good money. It's
Right.
having a healthy mix and, as you say, diverse funding sources. And in fact, about 5 years ago in our strategic plan, we noted that diversity in funding was critical for this institute. The board of directors also noticed that, and we've made a lot of progress. Our pie chart of support is really different than it was even 5 years ago, and I'm proud of that. But we have to keep making the pie bigger, not just slicing it differently. Because research funding in this country has really been stagnant for the last, at least a decade. And the buying power is lower. People need to make more money. They need to support their families. So science funding is being strangled. And I guess there's a perception in some parts that philanthropists such as Bill and Melinda Gates, and I guess Warren Buffett's son is funding agriculture research and so on, that the philanthropists are somehow filling the hole that the science agencies have left, but it's actually not the case. I mean, the total giving of philanthropists in this country for any kind of initiative that's, in education, science, and so on is about $1 billion. The National Institutes of Health is something like 30 times that, just by itself.
Yeah.
So it's not filling the hole. It's creating new opportunities, but we cannot, the country needs to support innovation. I mean, to me, it's a basic role of government. I would much rather have my tax dollars go there than some of the other places they're going, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it's cheap. It pays back. It pays back in jobs, better education. It helps pull people out of poverty. There's a whole lot of reasons to grow science and science-related jobs.
So earlier in our conversation, you talked about public engagement, and this will kind of be how we can wrap things up. You talked about being able to explain things, or it can be hard to explain things to members of Congress, but the members of Congress are frequently influenced by public perception, and you talked about engaging the public in the ivory tower. So for the future of science, where do you see us, where are we at right now? It seems like we're at in terms of public opinion, where there's a little bit of skepticism around things that, some people would say that there should be skepticism around. And how are we doing on improving that, and what's that going to look like in the future? Do you think we're going to, and I know that's part of the scenario planning as well, but, from what's your take on, how important is it to have that public engagement piece?
Well, I engage with the public all the time. In my spare time, I'm a farmer, so I have a stand at the Ithaca Farmers
That's
Market.
right. That's right.
And I talk to people every week about where the food comes from and what they care about. And I mean, our country is so polarized right now. Everything seems to be black and white or red and blue, however you want to see it. And so scientists are trained to always hedge their bets, to say, well, we kind of know this, but we're not sure. And then, people say, well, the scientists are never sure about anything. And then the scientists are taught to sound sure about things. Well, if you can't make me a promise that you've changed the world, then I'm not going to give you any more money. So they say things sometimes that are a little exaggerated. So scientists have gotten caught, you say, a little bit of a trap of trying to make their voices heard by perhaps, being overstated in some cases. Because science, in the reality of science, it's very incremental. One brick at a time. And then sometimes that brick turns out not to be so right after all, and you got to redo that, and we rediscover things. Sometimes we discover they were wrong. And that all used to be kind of hidden, I guess, to the public, this kind of iterative process, 3 steps forward, 1 step back. Because you get a new tool, a new technology, a new idea comes along, and you find out, well, we weren't right about that. And that should be perfectly okay. Mm-hmm. But in a society that's polarized, when somebody's found to be wrong, this is a big stain on so climate change discussions have fallen prey to this, and genetically modified plants have fallen prey to this. Usually the truth is in some boring, muddy, gray area,
Right.
Right. And scientists are very comfortable with that. As soon as you get them out into making declarative statement, this is right and this is wrong, they're out of their element, and they probably don't sound like they're telling the truth.
Right.
And so I think it's, it's a problem. It's a problem in a polarized world, how you develop nuanced arguments. They don't get you very far. So science is trying to find its voice. And I don't think by being strident or by being aloof, either one of those strategies is going to work very well. I think it's more about making sure that people grow up with science around them, with a sense of wonder about life, that they learn about life itself. And then science becomes a friendly thing. It becomes a lens through which one looks at the world, and it doesn't become something that other people do and that you don't care about. But, you know, in various surveys, you find out that something like 3/4 of the U.S. population is absolutely disinterested in science. I mean, this is a problem.
Yeah.
So, and even the other 25% may not know very much about it, including our policymakers, frankly. So, you know, we need to start early and educate. And, you know, BTI has a role, certainly, in these interns. We start with the high school, the undergraduate, the graduate students. But our schools, quite frankly, our K to 12, these have a critical role to play, and I think they know it. And so there's a lot of discussion about STEM education reform, how to get kids into science, involved in science, hands-on with science. BTI has done some of that. We're small, but we've done some. And then they grow up with this idea of what science really is, and they're not afraid of it. It's not a set of facts that they have to memorize, but it's about life around them and what it means and how it came to be. I think in the end, that's the answer.
And I think one thing I've really enjoyed here is really getting to see almost, you know, the non-science personality of the scientists. You know, they do other things. They play in bands, you know, they paint, they do photography, you know. So I'm always enjoy kind of the getting away from this idea that it's all like lab coats and gray-haired people doing science, you know.
Well, what's wrong with gray hair?
Well, I got more than I'd like to, but there is, you know, it is, you know, you can have a lot of other interests, and you know, it's when I asked, you know, one of our second interview of the day this morning, I asked Michelle Heck, what can people do to support BTI or support science in general? What action can non-science people take to help? And she said, you know, get your kids involved in science-related things. You know, talk to them about science. You know, get their minds thinking about science because we really need that. And I think that's really kind of touches upon what you're saying, kind of this recruitment. You know, if we start getting more people engaged in science, we'll have less issues as they get older because they'll kind of have an affinity towards it.
Well, I think also you mentioned something really important, which is kind of this family-friendly. So I think of BTI as a family because, you know, the Institute was founded by William Boyce Thompson. We're the Boyce Thompson Institute. So we are a kind of family. We're independent. You know, we're a 501c3 unto ourselves, affiliated with Cornell, but we're independent, which is a great thing. But what kind of jobs are we recruiting people to? And so BTI has been, you know, kind of a leading, you know, voice in establishing family-friendly policies. I think you were on leave recently.
I was, yeah.
It's a great thing.
It is.
The dad should take
nice.
leave, the mom should take leave, you know, everybody should take leave when they need to, and it's not going to kill science. And the old school mentality that you had to be, again, as I mentioned earlier, sort of chained to the lab bench. In my time, that was considered to be sort of a badge of honor that you took science seriously. But now folks are getting into science maybe a little later. They're raising families while they're students or postdocs. And so BTI needs to create an environment where I suppose that the well-being of the employee actually matters. There should be a stated value that well-being is a goal. It's not simply to create knowledge or to make discoveries or to improve agriculture. That's in our mission. But what about our values? How much do we value individuals, their careers, and their lives as a whole? And I mean, I've read various kinds of research that say people who take vacations, people who take family leave, they actually are more productive, not less productive. They don't get burned out. They come back with fresh ideas. I mean, this kind of a workplace I would like to promote. And I think in doing so, science careers in places like that will be more attractive to a wider variety of people who right now, they might look at science and go, oh, I'm expected to work 80 hours a week, 7 days a week. Why would I want to do that? You know, and maybe one person, you know, I was like that, you know, way back when. But why should we be selecting for people like that? Why can't it be a career that allows for personal growth, for recreation, et cetera? So to me, BTI is different because of that as well. And that's another thing we need to emphasize going forward. If we're going to diversify our workforce, make it a little more locally sourced and domestically sourced, I think that'll be critically important. It's just the right thing to do.
And I interviewed some of our interns that were here over the summer, and they said it was great. they were kind of guarded early on, but then it was clear that they could actually unleash their own personality in the labs where they were working. They were a little intimidated at first, trying to be very quiet and professional and everything, but they said that they were able to be themselves and around this building, and that was something they were really pleasantly surprised, I think, to find.
Yeah,
So.
and hopefully in the future it won't be so much of a surprise.
Well, I think it's a surprise in terms of their kind of stereotypical view of
Exactly.
a science institute.
Yeah,
Before
Well,
they get here.
Our intention is not to be like anybody else, it's to show the direction of the future.
Okay. Well, I think the kind of founding vision backs that up. And thanks for taking a few minutes of your day to kind of tell us how we're keeping that going.
It's been the best part of my day so far.
Great. President David Stern, he also has his own lab. We didn't really talk about that. Do you want to give any kind of a plug for what you're doing in the Stern lab right now?
Photosynthesis, it's everything. No, I think we'll just leave that aside. And,
Okay.
My webpage is there, it explains what we do.
All right, btiscience.org. You can learn more about the Stern lab. And thank you, David, again for your time and for sharing those insights.